David Fincher's Mank was without question one of my most anticipated films of the year, and one of the few films of that initial list that actually ended up coming out this year. And upon seeing the first reviews, they seemed a little mixed, which I find particularly interesting, as it isn't the first film by a legendary director that people have had mixed feelings on. Trust me, I would know. So, what did I think of Mank? Well, I kind of loved it, for a number of reasons. First one, of course, being David Fincher, who is one of my favorite and most influential directors. His work here is absolutely spot on, as it always is, but what I've found to be really interesting is because he's trying to recreate that old school Hollywood look and feel, that he actually allows for a little more imperfection every now and then, where all of his recent films have basically been flawless on a technical level. It's so cool to see Fincher maintain a lot of that in the camera work and the editing, but also add in these little stylistic flourishes, like these things. I'll just let Edward Norton and Brad Pitt explain to you.
If you look for it, you can see these little dots come into the upper right-hand corner of the screen.
In the industry, we call them cigarette burns.
That's the cue for a changeover. He flips the projectors, movie keeps right on going, and nobody in the audience has any idea.
Now, Mank was shot on digital by the incredible Eric Messerschmidt, but a lot of effort is made into allowing it to have that old-style film look, and it's these little details that really highlight the effort. The sound is also just terrific, as it has that kind of classic, flawed echo to it. And the lighting and the compositions actually feel a lot more heightened and stylized than the usual blue or yellow color palette used by Fincher. In fact, it reminded me a lot of his music video for Suit and Tie, which I've already broken down on the channel. No one does black and white like him, and I honestly think that this is the best looking black and white film since Roma. I also have a bit of bias towards this film because I just love films about films, especially ones that have an appropriate air of nostalgia about them, and Mank has that. It has that romantic golden age Hollywood feel, whilst at the same time not going overboard and feeling nostalgic just for the sake of it. This is still a relevant and hard-hitting film for any generation, or most generations, and the one interesting thing I want to discuss in terms of story is that this film's screenplay was written by Jack Fincher, David's dad, and I honestly don't feel that a lot was changed from the original script, because it does feel like it was written quite a while ago. I'm sure that this hasn't happened to a number of you, but I'd say that the way Mank's story progresses is sort of like when you're sat in an old bar somewhere or a restaurant, and you're sat next to like a group of old guys who have clearly been there and done that, and they're smoking cigars and drinking whiskeys, and they just talk about everything and hang out. And it's one of those things that may seem boring when you're young, but actually is really interesting if you genuinely listen. And the entire thing has this sort of raw, unrefined, unfiltered sensibility to it. And that's exactly the style of Mank's screenplay. I love how they jump back and forth in time, just like how people would when they would tell those stories. You know, they'd be like, oh, hang on, you need to know this bit to get to this bit before I get to this bit, so just give me a sec, let me tell this part first, kind of thing. It's brilliant because it feels like a hangout film almost. It doesn't have the same kind of precision as something like Gone Girl or The Social Network in terms of the non-linear structure. If anything, it feels almost like a Tarantino or a Scorsese film where the flashbacks are done in a much more relaxed way. And it's a really nice change of pace for Fincher, in my opinion. Now, there's only one real issue in terms of the script, which for me was not really an issue at all. Once again, it really works the same way an old man's story would, which is it kind of just shifts very randomly in terms of subject matter. The earlier sections of the film very much about the creation of films and Mank's efforts to write Citizen Kane, whereas the second half becomes a lot more political and turns into a much more philosophical and mature discussion on the politics at the time, which may not be as accessible to most people, but I absolutely loved it. And because you have Fincher's immaculate direction, that shift didn't feel too drastic for me, and I was completely fine with that. Another thing that really helped maintain consistency throughout was the score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, which once again does not feel like something they typically do. This really is the film actually where everyone on board kind of gets to work against type. It's almost like the anti-Fincher film, where you take everything that you expect from Fincher, and you still have one or two of those sensibilities, but it is very different, and I think in many ways it is his most unique film to date. We do, of course, have to talk about the performances. Gary Oldman is absolutely terrific in the role of Herman Mankiewicz, and truly superb supporting cast. Everyone brought their A game. I will say, however, that Oldman's performance could be a little bit too subdued at times for me. And I feel like this character could have been a little more over the top and larger than life. Something Oldman did brilliantly in that dinner table monologue, and of course as Winston Churchill. I did hear something about how years and years ago, when Fincher was trying to make this film, he wanted Kevin Spacey for the role, which I think would have been a terrific choice. Obviously not anymore, but that would have made for a much more extravagant version of the Mank character, although I do think Oldman is terrific and completely worthy of at least an Oscar nomination. My only real issue with the film, and it's an issue that I know a lot of other people have been bringing up as well, is that the film, like a drunk story being told by an old man, is not particularly emotionally relatable. It's very interesting, but I never truly felt emotionally invested in this particular story or character. A common criticism of Fincher's work is that it can be too cold and distant and devoid of emotion, and I personally have never found that. Even with The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, I cared about the characters, but with Mank, there was that emotional spark missing that kept me from truly connecting to anyone, which is a shame because every other aspect of the film was so amazing. And I think the lack of genuine earned emotion is ultimately what keeps it from being one of the greats. But that said, Mank is still without question a terrific film, one of the best of the year, and a truly beautiful piece of cinema.